Yo, 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 what is going on, CoD Familia? It is your boy BN, aka Mr. Kingdom Builder, and today I want to talk about the biggest hurdles and obstacles that Call of Dragons is facing right now when it comes to the potential that it has to take that next step or next few steps to eventually become what I truly believe it can be, which is the premier Kingdom Builder on the market to date. So let me start with number one. This is going to be KvK Balance. I think the KvK Matchmaking Balance is incredibly important. And there are a few hurdles that are, a few obstacles, we'll say, that are basically being caused, I guess, or the ripple effects, if you will, because of the way that matchmaking is being done. Now, to give you a preview on understanding how matchmaking currently is being done, let's take a look real quick at a spreadsheet that I have here for the first S2 plus groups going into their KvKs or their next KvKs. And you can see here from this, when you look at this column, this basically is total server power. Well, again, adjusted. This is basically where we take the top 7 alliances and we add them together, or we should say up to the top 7. I should be specific there. And you can see that between the alliance, between these kingdoms, right, this is what their estimated or average-ish power is going in. And you can see here's the range. The range is basically defined by the strongest group, strongest kingdom going in minus the power of the lowest powered kingdom going in. And you can see that the range here, or the power gap, is 11.37 billion. And you can see 13, 12, 9, 9. This is relatively okay, but then you see the extreme drop-off, right? 3, 3, 2, 2. If you go to the next group, 14, 13, 12, this is relatively okay. Even the 10 is somewhat-ish okay, but then you get the drop-off 6, 4, 1. Same here, 12, 11, 10. This is okay. Decent 2-build drop-off here at 8, 7, 7, but then you get the big drop-offs at 4, 2, 1, right? You could still argue the 7, 7s as well. Excuse me, next group. This is actually somewhat a little better, right? You can see the power gap here is about 6 billion. But again, 11, 10, 8, 7, 7, probably the 5, maybe 1 or 2 of the lower 7s. And then you get here, right, where it's 19, 16, 10, 9, 8. The 10, 9, 8 is okay, but the 19, 16, I mean, that's pretty wide range. Even here, 20, you can see this one is 17 billion difference. 12, 20, 16, 15, 13, right? And then the super drop off 4, 3, 3. And you kind of get the trend, right, where it's we'll pair some strong kingdoms, 1 or 2 in the middle, and then a few at the bottom. And the challenge with this inherently is that the alliances that are lower powered are not going to have the same opportunities to participate in a meaningful and relevant way as the stronger alliances that are all close in power or the top of the group. And this is why it's important, I believe, to at least try and test out a new approach where you basically take the number 1 through 8 or the number 1 through 4, and then you do 5 through 8, or you'll do 1 through 8 or 1 through 6, and then you'll basically do it in groups, right? So you do the top 4, then the next 4, then the next 4, then or the top 6, next 6, top 8, next 6, or next 8, next 8. And to give you an example of this, I'll show you here when we look at servers right up to 7 alliances. So an example would have been going into this KvK, or this S2 plus KvK for this group, is if you took like this, right? You took kingdoms, like you could even argue this, right? Like 1 through 6, which would have been 43, 42, 90, 88, 87, 81, and then look at that. Now the next 6, look at this, but it's a 1.3 billion gap difference, right? That you could have done. Look at the next 6, right? This is what's that? 1.7 billion gap difference. Not that bad. Then you look at the next 6, and again, I'm just giving 6 as an example here, but look at this, 500 million, right? It gets better. And sure, you might have some ranges here and there. Like, for example, here, this is a 1.5, but you can see the range is not 7, 8, 10, 13, 14, 15 billion difference. It's a lot more reasonable. And if you can get to that point, the motivation and the engagement from the average player is more willing to go out there and fight and participate because they're not going to see some wide power gap that is deterring them potentially for some away from going out and fighting or from having sustainable long-term fighting. Right? These are things that are very important, right? If you think that players don't go and look at leaderboards when they're in Season 1 and their alliance leader, or if they have to fight and go do some PvP somewhere, and you're thinking, oh, they're not looking at that and wondering, okay, well, do I really want to go and fight, or do I really want to go invest in this event and overuse or overinvest my resources just so we can try and boost our alliance points up when the other alliances or other alliance that we're trying to beat against has so much more power and they're already so much more further ahead of us? They do look at these things, and this is where that player psychology aspect comes into it, where you have to understand how an individual thinks and how they can approach and how they'll view certain things that are happening in the game, right? The average player pays attention a lot more than we may think, but just may not be in the areas that we think they're looking in. But these are, again, very important, I believe, aspects of the game to understand when it comes to why you would do a KvK matchmaking when balancing it in this way. So for me, that's something I think can be an improvement compared to what they're doing right now. I just think it's incredibly negatively detrimental to the kind of long-term sustainability of how a season is going to play out and how the average player feels going into this, especially if you're at the top. If you're not getting that much PvP because you're a top alliance and there's just not that much competition or not that many people that want to have long-term sustaining and engaging fights, right? That also factors in from putting in low-powered kingdoms / alliances into your group. And the same thing, right, obviously can be said just on the reverse end, as we talked about. Next one for me is going to be map design. Number 2. Map design for me is pretty straightforward. I think the really important thing to understand is that the S1 Plus map, to me, I thought was just very well done. The S2 Plus map, I think, is probably the next best one. And then you're probably looking at the S1 and the S2 map. However, the thing to understand about the S1 map is that it's a vanilla map. It's supposed to introduce you to the game. So it's not really supposed to be what a KvK is, right? It's really supposed to more so resemble a home kingdom, which we'll get to that in a moment. And so if we're looking at, as an example, let's go to the wherever my scout camp is here, and we'll look at the map. You can see here that you have essentially a straight shot to Zone 3. You have 6 Zone 1s, you have 4 Zone 2s, you have 2 Zone 3s, and a Zone 4. Now, this map design relatively is a little bit better than the S2 one because, one, they have these PvP fighting zones that's here, basically, in a Zone 2, but then you're kind of funneling here into a Zone 3. The other challenge is that you don't have any access here between Mezavin and Scalera, right, because there's a mountain range that blocks, which means the only opportunity you really have for this kind of east versus west to really fight against each other would be in the Runic, which is basically a small little PvP zone where you could send 1 unit per player in at a time for those that control the pass and or with unions. And that's between Morbrez and Dulin, which is your Zone 3s. And so part of it is that, right, I actually just would have liked to seen another PvP zone, another neutral PvP zone, and then you could still have the Runic, right? Have the Runic, have another neutral PvP zone. I think that would have been a little bit better. On top of that, I think instead of having, for example, 2 Zone 3s, I would have liked for them to have 3 Zone 3s. And then also allow for a neutral PvP zone to happen here between Mezavin and Scalera as well, and then another Runic. And then from here, you can go into 2, right? So this is your Zone 1, this is your Zone 2. You'd have 3 Zone 3s, 2 Zone 4s, and then maybe the final Zone 5, right? Make it more of a pyramid where you give more alliances an opportunity, more alliances, and really more what we should be saying is kingdoms, but more players an opportunity to advance farther in a season. Right? Going from 3 Zone 1s to 1, I mean, you're basically cutting out 2/3 of the player bases. And if you're crossing that off here, that's the same thing, right? It's 2/3 here, 2/3 here, right? So you're really, I mean, in retrospect, unless you're allying with these, the worst case scenario is that only one of these zones go into Zone 3. That's incredibly detrimental when you think about the amount of player drop-off that's occurring. It shouldn't be that steep, right, in a season. It should really be more, it should be small increments. So, for example, you're going from 3 here, then go to 2, and then go to 1, and then do your final, right? You're trying to give as many people an opportunity to advance. And with this, it's just, again, the price is just too much when you think about how many. Now, the other side of it is that when you create this kind of West versus East mentality, this is also something that, this is the last part I'll mention about the map design, is that what we're seeing in quite a few of these KvKs is that there's not as much PvP that's happening right now. And that is it's two parts here, right? People really have to understand where I'm coming from. One part is because of the way the map is designed, where it creates this West versus East mentality, meaning that you'll have one allied group go to one side and the other allied group go to the other side. Or you might have some early Zone 1 fighting, and then they'll just resurge out before the first 7 days hits. The other side of it, which is part two, is that it also factors into how, because bear in mind, usually in kingdom builders, you're always going to have some type of alliance diplomat or potentially kingdom representative diplomat, and they're going to be the ones who are going out and talking to other alliances and potentially other kingdoms that have multiple alliances, and they'll figure out and say, okay, hey, look, let's partner up, or we'll ally, we'll go in and work together for this upcoming season, and this is where we're going to land. That side of it is also a factor because remember, they can choose how they want to land and what they want to engage in. The challenge with, again, is that the map design doesn't really favor an opportunity for allied groups to split themselves somewhat evenly across the Zone 1s where we could potentially be seeing more PvP, because you have to think about it like this. You have to essentially either commit to 2 of the 3 Zone 1s on the west or the east side if you feel like you're going to have an advantage, right? I don't think that there's a lot of allied groups that are going to say to themselves, oh yeah, let's just go into Enegad and we'll just fight the Crozin and the Mezavin forces. Or let's go into Orient and we'll fight the Scalera Duer. It's just, again, when you're thinking about percentage chances to be successful, that's not a high percentage play, that's a low percentage play. The high percentage play is to say, let's go over to one side of the east or the west, and then we'll fight it out from there. So, yes, in part, some of that responsibility does fall on the alliances and the leads and the diplomatic reps themselves, but it's not as though it's not like they have a lot of options, right? That's really what has to be understood here. Then we get to number 3. To me, this is also a very big impact, which is filling up alliances with good player activity. And I'm going to give you an example here of what I'm talking about. So, if we switch this up and we'll bring up this one, which basically brought up the same thing, and I thought it was going to do my scout. Shocking. So we'll do this because clearly they hate me at the moment. So we'll do this. I'll overlap this one a bit. So if I take my scout and let's just go to whatever a newish kingdom is, right? So let's go whatever 296. Let's let this load. This is I think this is like the 3rd or 4th latest kingdom that has come out. I don't think I've made my characters in the newest ones. I have a character in every kingdom. That's always my goal, but I think there's 2 new kingdoms I have to wait. While we let this load up, I'm going to show you the early Augerstone chapter that I think should be a little bit of a bigger factor and changed up a bit. Oh gosh, hang on. I might not have one here. Oh, hang on. We might need to go to another. But you can see, right? I have almost an account in every kingdom. This is what we'll do. Let's keep it easy breezy, beautiful cover girl. And we're going to go, I think I have one in 266. Let's let this load up. I think that number sounds right. 262, 267, 268. I think those were ones that I was making it in. However, where I'm trying to get with this is that one of the first Augerstone chapters, I think if it is the first one, and we'll double check, is that you have to hit, I think it's like 10,000 people have to hit level 4, something around there. So here we go. I guessed right. Lovely. We'll let this load up, and then you can see here as we go all the way to the left, faith above all. It's 7,500. That's what it is. So 7,500 lords must upgrade their cities to level 4 by the end of the countdown. Look at how many lords leveled this up, right? And I believe this is a 2-day, I think it's a 2 or 3 day countdown for the first chapter. So think about, you have 2 to 3 days, and you didn't even get 5,000 people that leveled up their cities to level 4, right? And if you look at this kingdom as an example for its power, I mean, look at this. Yeah, sure, they're going with a mega alliance structure, which is basically how almost all kingdoms will play out by default, right? Unless there's alternative actions that are taking place. But look at the rest of the alliances here, right? I mean, this is nothing. I mean, this kingdom is arguably dead if you think about it like that, right? Which is basically a one alliance. And I mean, they're probably not even full all the way up. Yeah, they're not, right? They still have some spots left available. So the challenge is, and this is something I'm tracking, I'm going to be looking forward to showing this data later on, is that this needs to be changed. I would like to see this as a primary prerequisite before a new kingdom is released, where instead of it going at level 4, I want to see them get to level 11. And the reason why is because once you hit level 11, that is when your gosh, your region selection, your region change item disappears. And the other factor for this is that you have to understand the higher level that you hit, the more likely you're playing that game longer. There's a higher percentage chance you will continue playing the game, well, just in general, a higher percentage chance that you will continue to play the game if you hit a higher level compared to a lower level, right? Like someone who's still playing and is at level 20 is more likely to continue playing than someone who just hit level 4, right? Because you don't know if they will continue liking it or not. So the idea here is that I would raise this to level 11, and I actually would be somewhat okay with leaving the 7,500. I would just like for that to be the minimum expectation, is that you have to get 7,500 lords that hit level 11 before you open a new kingdom. That's something I would like to. Now, again, you can always adjust that, right? But I would like to see that happen and be a primary prerequisite before a new kingdom opens, because I think that will generate higher and more consistent quality of activity within new kingdoms, and it's a very big thing. I'll be looking forward to showing you that data. Then we get to my next one, which is number 4: alliance focus versus kingdom focus. The game itself is a little bit more on the alliance focus side than it is on the kingdom focus side, and this has been the case pretty much since the game's inception. The challenge with this, and there's been other people that have talked about this, right? Omniarch Chisgul have mentioned this as well. And again, with valid points. It really comes down to more of a community aspect compared to a group aspect. And we're talking the difference between, a community social engagement, a social interaction versus a small group's social engagement and interaction. And for the most part, people like playing these games very similar to how I would imagine they like playing other types of like MMO, RPGs, or games where you can have, 100, 150, 200 people in an alliance, a guild, etc. And that's because they like to hang out with other people. And sure, you can have good activity within your alliance. But the biggest, I believe, obstacle on this point is that by having more of a kingdom-wide approach allows for the game itself to generate more money. You have to think about it. If you have more players that are playing your game, and you think about the people that spend money or your needles in the haystack, are you likely to have more needles in the haystack with 100 million people or with 20 million people? Well, I would argue the 100 million people you're more than likely to. Same thing when you think about how kingdoms are populated, right? Someone said it before that there's about like 20,000, give or take, new accounts that are getting into. I think the last report we saw for the latest kingdom was like around 23,000 accounts were made, new accounts were made. And that doesn't mean those are all converting over to continued playing time, but it means that's the amount. So I would argue around 15 to 20,000 players are getting populated into a new kingdom, right? That's a conservative estimate. And then you have to think about, well, how many of those people are going to continue playing? This goes back to the thing I was saying about how new kingdoms are populated, right? There's a higher percentage chance that more players will continue playing the game if the kingdoms are filled with a higher quality level of activity. But on top of that, if you have more players that are playing the game, and because they're more engaged due to a kingdom-wide social community aspect versus just an alliances, that's something that can allow players to be more motivated, to be more invested, to be willing to conversate, socialize more, be more engaged overall in the kingdom, because it is beyond just an alliance. These are really important things. And it's one of the reasons why, because I'm talking about this alliance focus versus kingdom focus, is that before, part of the alliance focus when they were doing the resets is that some of it kind of almost feels temporary to an extent. Not fully, because obviously if you have all the players in your alliance on a Discord or on some type of social media, medium platform that you can still communicate to, before you had to, alliances were reset. So you basically, everyone got kicked out of the alliance and they had to keep rejoining. Obviously that has changed since the last update, but it is still, the second to last update. However, it is still a major factor that is played into setting that precedent early on in the game's life, where now people are starting to figure out, okay, well, that's not the case anymore. Now we can hang out and we can stay in our alliance, which is obviously a big improvement, but it was, I would argue, severely detrimental early on. And so because of these things, the biggest challenge is that there's just not this kind of kingdom-wide, larger community aspect to the game, attachment, if you will, bond, that most other kingdom builders have, and Rock is a great example of this, right? They have a kind of kingdom first approach when it comes to how everyone is looked after. You don't really have in well ran kingdoms, you don't have civil wars that are popping off everywhere. If jumper groups going into new kingdoms, one of the biggest things that they try to avoid is early fighting, right? Nobody wants to sit there and fight all day in season 1 because season 1 is viewed as a development season, and that's really what it should be here in COD. But the challenge right now is that part of it due to the lack of quality activity fulfillment in a new kingdom, and because there's not a kingdom-wide focus approach, and because there's not also a development focus approach, because of all of those other two factors, mainly the second one, is that it all kind of meshes together, with it, in my view, being kind of a net negative, right, or a detriment to the game, to the potential success of where the game could be. And like I said, this goes into having things like home kingdoms, like we've talked about, like with the king-queen system. Even if it's very rudimentary and very simple, it doesn't have to be as expansive as Rock is. But at least with something like a King's Mail, right, where you can message all the players in the kingdom. I mean, just something like that has so much reach into organizing the player base, keeping the player base engaged, being able to inform them and say, oh, wow, man, like these people actually have a plan. Like we can be included in that. I can't tell you how motivating that can be for the average player to get a mail, to get a well-written mail that really talks about how they can still be a factor, how they can be a benefit, how they can contribute to what the kingdom's doing. And more importantly, if you send things like educational mails, think about how awesome that is for a player to get those types of things in the game that's actually helping them and teaching them. Because it's not like there's some guide or tutorial that goes through, oh yeah, well, here's the talent trees you should run. Like there's nothing like that unless you go outside and you look. But usually players are going to look internally first if they have the opportunity to do so versus externally outside of the game, whether that's YouTube, Discord, etc. So then we get to my next one, which is the free healing increase. Or free healing. I'm a very big believer that, I think this is number 6. Free healing to me just needs to be improved. Or sorry, this is number 5. Free healing needs to be improved. It's the scale back was, I think, a little bit too much. I personally would almost argue the opposite. Is I'd like for free healing just to be increased, maybe even a little bit more. But this kind of runs into that same thing when you talk about free healing and kind of rate of troop training, where you think about, because you don't have deaths in the open field and the only deaths come from passes or from city rallies, the view is that you're basically stockpiling a bunch of troops, but your hospital can still fill up a lot, right? So you're not, and the idea is that you shouldn't be able to obviously heal up every single troop after you have a full day's worth of fighting. I understand that, right? Because if you're just instant healing, right, then where are the advantages or disadvantages going to come, right? Where are you going to see the attrition fall, right, from one side to the other when they get exhausted? And so, but my thing is, I would at least like to see them revert back to where they were at, and then reassess from there, right? That to me is the biggest thing, is revert the healing back to what it was on the free side. Again, I would even argue going the opposite way, even if it's only like 10, 20%, whatever it may be, and then assess, right? But at least at minimum reset, assess where it is there, get some feedback, and then really look at how the fights are playing out, right? Because, again, the challenge right now is that it is somewhat hard to see how long fighting will happen, because you're not really having the sides that are kind of at all-out wars in most of the S2 plus KvKs. And that was because of the reasons I mentioned before. Now, once we get to the final Zone 4, we'll probably have a better idea on how sustained will the fights be, but also bear in mind that should not be your baseline. Your baseline should be having fighting that's happening in early Zone 2, right? That really should be a true baseline. And then your second baseline would be your Zone 3, and then you have a new baseline or your third baseline for Zone 4, right? Because the idea is you're trying to look at how sustained will the PvP be in a long term. And it's just, again, you don't want to go off of what it's going to be in Zone 4, because that's where everyone's going to be, basically culminating, if you will, right at the end, where all the alliance activity hopefully will be there, or at least as much as it can be based on the winners and losers of previous zones. But for me, that's how I view the free healing. I'd love to obviously know your guys' thoughts. Number 6, I think finally, is migration. So migration for me, and bear in mind, I'm not going to obviously cover everything. I'm just going to cover what I feel are some of the kind of macro, big picture highlighted points. Migration for me is another big thing. And this kind of goes back into having a home kingdom versus alliance focus representation. Is that the challenge with migration is you have no control over it, right? It's essentially Infinity Kingdom / Rock to an extent. Where, if not maybe even worse, really, because at least Infinity Kingdom you could have minimum set. But in COD, anyone can come over, right? There's no power limit. The only thing is it's available slots, right? So if you're a stronger powered kingdom, a more active kingdom, you have less available slots. And then if you are a weaker or lower active kingdom, you have more available slots. And this ranges from what we believe from like 1 to 350 slots, if you will. And so the challenge, like I said, is that, again, there's no supervision, right? There's no regulation over it. And I can tell you, I'll give you one example, and this isn't meant to like glorify and say this is the majority, but this is meant to share with you how negatively impactful an alliances or a potential multiple alliances experiences can be, which could be hundreds of players. There was a situation that happened where an alliance migrated all their players to another kingdom because they wanted to go up against the alliance in the kingdom they migrated to. But they didn't want to play with them. They wanted to ally with other alliances in that KvK group just to go against them. So you have to think about it. If the idea, like, what's the idea of migration? It's not to bring in enemies, it's to bring in allies. So the fact that you can't control this it blows my mind. It makes no sense to me. And again, that's not a slight on the devs and saying, oh, how dare they do that? It's just, if you're rationally and logically thinking about this, it is. It's a little wild to think. And so it's one of the reasons why when I look at Rock and I looked at Infinity Kingdom, it's just the fact that if you have a king-queen, which bear in mind, COD does not have a king-queen system right now. I believe they should have one. And migration should be one of those things outside of Kingsmail that you can control, right? You have the access to do that. So anyways, this is something that I think is somewhat harmful, because when you go into a new KvK, you don't have... Like, you don't even know who your allies are, right? You can migrate into a kingdom, but because there's no home kingdom, or there's no way for you to identify who the leaders are, who the players are, you don't really know, right? You have, like, when you go and you try to migrate, there's not something that says, oh, this is the leader, these are the alliances, or these are the players, or anything like that, right? So you can migrate into a kingdom, but the only way you're really going to know who's in that kingdom is by, now what you can do, because they've added this in, is you can look at on the leaderboard and go into an alliance and look at the lead and click on their profile, and you can see what home kingdom they're from. But that's a very roundabout way of doing it, right? Before that came out, in the second to last update, you had to basically go into chat and or somewhere else and find out where, or on Discord or somewhere else, that's almost arguably outside of the game, what, or ask in world chat, where are these, like, what kingdom are you from? So if you really understood like the process, or if you're just someone who maybe doesn't play COD and you went through it, you would be almost flabbergasted because of just how like rudimentary it is, like just almost how raw it is, and how difficult it can be to do these things. So again, because there's more of an alliance focus, to me, why don't you just make it, if you're going to go down this path, which I don't necessarily agree with, but to me it almost makes it easier if you just allow for alliances to recruit for themselves, right? Like, it's almost like there's no point in you going to a kingdom at this point, right? Just have players go and apply for alliances or guilds, if you will, and then just pair them that way. Now, again, I'm not advocating for that. I actually think that would be a little bit more net negative and more negatively impactful. But it just begs the question, like, what's going on there? Next one for me is Barricades and Turrets, and this is pretty simple. Barricades and Turrets for me, I just believe that the reason why they were so negatively impactful to the game is because people are just building them in mass. There's hundreds of barricades that are being built everywhere, and I'll give you an example here if I can show you one, maybe. I think there was something here with, oh gosh, hang on, I have to find it now. Oh, hang on, I think it's here. Is it here? No, it's not here. Okay, well, no, never mind. I guess they've removed some. But this used to be a lot more, right? So obviously, we're deleting things now. But you can just imagine this. You see all these turrets here? Imagine this flooded with turrets. And again, this isn't sliding any of these alliances at all. It's just, if you go and you look at a lot of the PvP zones, this is what's happening. You're seeing so many turrets, and before it was barricades that were being built. And the challenge is that these on-field buildable structures should not be a primary focus. They should be a secondary focus. They should be an add-on, right? It should be something that you are tactically and strategically placing to create potential advantages or disadvantages, right, on your opponents. It shouldn't be the thing that is dictating overall success or failure in PvP. And so my view is, like, you should just limit it to one build per player. and bring back barricades and just do the same thing. You allow for one barricade, one turret to be built per player, and then you potentially limit the amount that can be built within a turret's range or within a flag's range. So this way it doesn't become out of hand. Next one for me is going to be, I think, ways to acquire legendary heroes, and I hope that they eventually come out with this, but I would love for free-to-play to have an opportunity to have ways to where they can eventually unlock all the legendary heroes. And that's not the same as saying you're going to level them up and max them all out in a day, but at least having the opportunity to unlock and eventually gain sculptures. Bear in mind, you're never going to be able to do it at the same rate and pace that someone who's spending will be, but there needs to be options to where you can unlock everything in the game as a free-to-play, and you have to be able to level those things, but based on the amount of time that you're putting in, and obviously at a relative pace. So yeah, next one is going to be for me is arrows and treaties. This is with your tower and your rally beacon. Currently at the moment, it just takes a very substantial amount of time to level these things. And again, this is like your rally beacon here. If I'm trying to level this up and I have to get these treaty books, it takes a long time to get these. I would argue almost a little bit longer than it, or maybe not as long as it takes the watchtower. But these are things that are really important. And I think hopefully they will be areas that, again, whether it's other events or maybe the rate of these, and I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts too as well. I know when we did one of these before, there were people that had said, yeah, these are a little difficult to get, especially if you're free to play. And I'd be curious, if you're free to play, how long have you been playing and what level are you at, right? And how do you feel about it? Because to me, that would be like the great way to do it, or a great way to ask to get that feedback. Next one is going to be war pets. War pets for me is, there's been some improvements here. I want to point, and this is more of a shout out because there has been some improvements. They basically now allow for you to initially place and to replace skills at your choosing, which is a huge W. This has been replaced with basically just a grinding system to unlock the skill, which I'm okay with. But I just wanted to give a shout out because I think the system is so much better than what it was initially going in. And it feels like they're getting very close, if not really at a new starting point for finding a happy medium. The next one, and this is one I think that Chiz and Omni might have mentioned, I know Chiz did, where he talked about Darklings and Creatures having scaled leveling and scaled rewards. And I'll give you an example here. If I look at a level 38, and you can see here that you're getting 10,000 of these and then a gold key, and I look at, let me go to like zone 1 as an example, so I can try to find one here, because I'm sure there's probably higher or not as low levels here. I'll look at that. See, there's like almost nothing. Can I find, what's like the lowest level Darkling I can find? Can I do a 1? I can. So if I do a 1, and you can see, this is easier to show you. So you'll see EXP 100, Prestige 300. You would imagine that this would just double, right? Like that makes sense. I'll take double or triple, right? Each level. If I go to level 2, and I don't want to like over summon these, 200, 350, right? So EXP is the same. Prestige goes up a bit. Level 3, 300. Okay. So it's going incremental. Now let's do a 10. Actually, I'm sorry. I don't even need to do all that. You can see it right here. Look at this. So look at this. 9. So we'll do 1. Right. So look, 400, 500. This isn't doubling. It's just incrementally going up. Once I get to 8, then it's 900. 9 is 1100, and then it goes up. Plus 2, plus 3, plus 400. Right. You can see the differences here. 18, and then plus 400 again. Plus 400 again. Plus 400, plus 500, plus 500, plus 600, plus 600 it went up, plus 600, and then 600 again, plus 6, and then it goes up plus 7, right? So I understand what they're doing on that side, but I think with like just the level of rewards and how the scaling goes, it's just it is interesting to me, right? Because obviously, I think the big thing, and again, maybe no one really cares about this. My thing is, I would just like for things to be somewhat consistent, right? Either do it the same way, going from level 1 all the way up, or at least be, I would say, transparent and say, well, this is the reason why we're doing it. And I'm not saying this is a bad thing at all. And maybe this is a small thing to some people, but it's something that at least I would like to see be more consistent across Darklings, across patrols, or Darklings and Creatures, right across the board. With that in mind, I think that's pretty much it for me. I would love to know what you guys think. I didn't realize this video was going to go as long as it went, but I would really love to hear your guys' views on it. Do you agree? Do you disagree with some of the things I've mentioned? Do you have a different viewpoint? Do you have other things that you'd like to mention? As I said before, this isn't to include everything. It's just to go over some of the big things that I think could really turn the game around. I don't want to say turn the game around, but can improve the game for a continued betterment. And hopefully to allow for it to also grow in its success. yeah, so you know, hopefully, and you know, the reset thing is obviously another thing too as well. I didn't really touch on that, but I think the reset thing has been improving, very similar to Warpaths. I think it's going in a better direction than how it started, and so hopefully that will continue going down that path. And yeah, so with that in mind, that's pretty much it. I'll be doing another video that will go over suggestions and things like that I would like to see them add into the game, where I'll be a little bit more specific in that. This was just to kind of go over big hurdles and obstacles. That's going to do it for me. As always, until next time, I'll catch you later.